Think about standing on a wall that has never been broken. For over 1,000 years, the Theodosian Walls of Constantinople of human security. They were a triple-layered masterpiece of Roman engineering, a vertical fortress 40 feet high and 15 feet thick, surrounded by a massive 19-meter-wide moat. This wasn't just a defense, it was the final boss of the ancient world. 23 different armies had stood before these stones: Attila the Hun, the Vikings, the Arabs, the Crusaders, and for 23 generations the walls had held. To the people inside, these stones were divinely protected. They represented a legacy that would last forever. But in the spring of 1453, the definition of forever changed. Out in the darkness of the Ottoman camp, a 21-year-old sultan named Mehmed II was about to unleash a sound that would physically tear the Middle Ages apart. It was a roar that could be heard 20 miles away, a physical shockwave that rattled the teeth of every man on those battlements and announced the arrival of a new era. This was the birth of the Ottoman bombard, the giant cannon that turned the most formidable fortress on earth into a pile of rubble and proved that in the face of superior firepower, even the greatest empires are just brittle stone. This is the story of how 18 tons of bronze and a hell of a lot of gunpowder murdered the age of the night and gave birth to the modern world. To understand why this weapon was such a black swan event, you have to understand the world into which it was born. In the 15th century, warfare was a game of patience and starvation. If you were an aggressor, you didn't break into a city. You sat outside and waited for the people inside to start eating their horses and boot leather. High walls were the ultimate insurance policy. If you had stone and you had height, you held the power. The Byzantine Empire, though a shadow of its former Roman glory, still held the most valuable real estate on the planet because of those walls. Constantinople sat at the throat of the world's trade routes, and for a millennium, it was the unconquerable capital. But while the Byzantines were clinging to the prestige of their ancestors, the science of destruction was evolving in the shadows. Gunpowder had arrived from the east, but for a century it was mostly a gimmick, loud, smoky, and more dangerous to the gunner than the target. Most generals thought cannons were a waste of resources. They were too heavy to move, too slow to fire, and too inaccurate to hit anything. But history isn't made by people who look at the limitations of a tool. It's made by people who see the potential of an idea. The architect of this change was a man named Orban. History is often blurry about where he came from, but we know he was a master founder, a man who worked with liquid fire and heavy metal. He was a mercenary of innovation who didn't care about the clash of civilizations. He cared about the limits of engineering. Orban first went to the Byzantine Emperor Constantine XI with a pitch that sounds like a modern defense contract. He promised a weapon that could shatter the walls of any city in existence. But Constantine was broke, the Byzantine treasury was empty, and the emperor was trapped in a mindset of traditional defense. He couldn't pay Orban's fee, and he didn't have the copper required for a massive casting. This was the turning point. Orban didn't give up. He pivoted. He walked across the lines to the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II. Picture the scene, a 21-year-old ruler surrounded by advisors telling him that Constantinople was an impossible dream, meets a grizzled engineer who says he can build a key to the city's gates. Mehmed didn't ask if it was possible. He asked, "How soon can you start?" He gave Orban a salary 4 times what he asked for and turned the entire industrial capacity of the Ottoman Empire over to him. In the foundries of Adrianople, Orban spent the winter of 1452 doing the impossible. This wasn't just big blacksmithing, it was a leap into the unknown. Casting a bronze barrel of this size had never been done. If the cooling process was uneven, the metal would develop internal stress fractures. If the alloy mix, roughly 75% copper and 25% tin, was off, the barrel would shatter like glass the moment the powder ignited. The resulting weapon, known as the basilica, was a bronze monster 27 feet long, weighing nearly 19 tons. Its bore was 30 inches wide, large enough for a grown man to crawl inside, and it was designed to fire hand-carved granite spheres weighing up to 1,500 pounds. This wasn't just a cannon, it was an industrial-scale engine of kinetic energy. But building it was only half the battle. Now they had to move it. Think about the logistics of 1453. There were no hydraulic lifts and no internal combustion engines. To get this Titan 150 miles from the foundry to the walls of the city, it took a team of 60 oxen and 400 men. This wasn't a transport. It was a construction project. 200 men walked ahead of the cannon purely to level the ground and build heavy-duty wooden bridges over every stream. If the ground was soft, the 19-ton mass would sink into the mud and be lost. It was a 2-month crawl across the landscape, a slow-motion arrival of the apocalypse. For the defenders on the walls, this was psychological torture. They spent 60 days watching this mechanical god of war slowly, inexorably crawling toward them across the horizon. It told them that their enemy wasn't just bigger, their enemy was more organized, more disciplined, and more technologically advanced. When the bombard finally arrived, it was a physical manifestation of the Sultan's will. When the bombardment began on April 6th, the rules of warfare were rewritten in blood. Firing the bombard was a violent, dangerous ritual. First, the crew would pack the powder chamber with a massive charge of serpentine gunpowder. Then they would use winches to roll the 1,500-pound granite ball down the barrel. When the match hit the touch hole, the explosion was so violent that the cannon would kick back hundreds of feet and the smoke would blacken the sky. But physics is a harsh mistress. Every time the bombard fired, the bronze barrel absorbed an incredible amount of heat. If they fired it again too quickly, the metal would expand and lose its structural integrity. To prevent this, the crew had to douse the barrel in warm olive oil after every firing, allowing the metal to cool slowly and maintain its tensile strength. Because of this, the Great Bombard could only fire about 7 times a day. If you're a defender on those walls, 7 shots might not seem like much, but these weren't ordinary shots. Each impact carried the kinetic energy of a modern wrecking ball traveling at 400 feet per second. Theodosian walls had no answer for chemical energy. The granite balls didn't just hit the stones, they penetrated them, turning the ancient Roman masonry into a liquid-like spray of rubble. Every time the bombard fired, a section of history was vaporized. For 53 days, the city shook. The defenders worked through the night to plug the gaps with dirt and timber, but you can't fight the future with mud. The bombard was a door opener, systematically dismantling 1,000 years of security 7 shots at a time. This is where the story gets into the masculine heart of warfare, the clash of wills. On one side, you had Mehmed II, the new man. He was a student of history who wanted to end the past. He was a polyglot and a military visionary who understood that the future belongs to those who embrace the impossible scale of technology. On the other side, you had Constantine XI, the old world. He was a man of honor and tradition. He knew the odds were 10 to 1 against him, but he refused to surrender. When Mehmed offered to let him live if he gave up the city, Constantine replied that he and his people were prepared to die by their own free will. That is the warrior's mindset in its purest form, one side pushing the limits of the possible, the other side refusing to break even when the ground is literal dust beneath their feet. The siege reached its breaking point on the night of May 28th. The walls were no longer walls. They were mounds of debris that the Ottoman janissaries could finally climb. Mehmed ordered his camp to be silent. Thousands of lanterns were lit, creating a ring of fire around the city. At 1 a.m. on May 29th, the assault began. It wasn't a clean victory. The Byzantines fought like lions in the rubble, using their bodies to plug the holes the bombard had made. But the psychological and physical damage was done. Ottoman soldiers found a small postern gate, the Karaka Porta, which had been damaged by the bombardment and left unsecured. They flooded through. Constantine XI saw that the day was lost. He didn't run. He stripped off his imperial purple robes and his crown because he didn't want to be a trophy. He drew his blade, gathered his remaining men, and charged into the thickest part of the breach. His body was never found. He died as a soldier, defending the walls that a giant bronze gun had turned to gravel. The fall of Constantinople was a black swan event that changed the DNA of human power. The Great Bombard had proven that the era of the castle was over. This shifted power from local lords to centralized national governments. It created the modern state, because only a king with a national treasury could afford the massive cost of an artillery train. It also forced a total revolution in architecture. Tall, thin stone walls were now death traps. This led to the Star Fort low, thick, earthen ramparts designed to deflect cannon fire rather than resist it. The knight, the armored warrior who had dominated the battlefield for 5 centuries, was rendered obsolete by a man in a foundry miles away. This was the birth of industrial warfare. The design was so effective that the Ottomans continued to cast these super guns for centuries. In 1464, they cast the Dardanelles gun, a 16-ton monster based on the same principles. Here is the most insane fact in military history: that gun remained in active service for 444 years. In 1807, the world was locked in the grip of the Napoleonic Wars. The British Royal Navy, flush with the recent glory of Trafalgar, was the undisputed master of the seas. Their ships were floating cathedrals of oak and iron, manned by the most professional sailors in history and bristling with the latest industrial-grade cannons. When a British fleet under Admiral Sir John Duckworth was ordered to force its way past the Dardanelles Straits to pressure the Ottoman Empire, they expected a challenge, but they believed their technological superiority was absolute. As the fleet navigated the narrow, treacherous waters of the straits, the Turkish defenders did something that defied all modern military logic. They didn't rely solely on their contemporary batteries. Instead, they turned to a relic. They reached back into their history and loaded a 350-year-old bronze behemoth with a massive ancient stone ball. When the fuse was lit, the resulting roar didn't just signal a shot, it signaled a collision of eras. A 1,500-pound granite sphere, hand-carved during the Middle Ages, screamed through the air and slammed into the side of the HMS Endymion. The Endymion was a heavy frigate, one of the fastest and most modern ships in the British arsenal, yet it was nearly sent to the bottom of the sea by a weapon that should have been in a museum. The stone shot pulverized the thick oak timbers, creating a hole so massive that the ship's survival was a matter of sheer luck and desperate repair. Think about the psychological weight of that moment. A weapon designed when the consensus of the known world was still debating the shape of the Earth was capable of crippling a ship representing the height of the Industrial Revolution. This wasn't a fluke. It was a testament to a standard of over-engineering that the modern world has largely forgotten. This is the enduring heavy metal legacy of Ottoman metallurgy. To understand how a 15th century gun could threaten a 19th century superpower, we have to look at the genesis of the Great Bombards. In 1453, Sultan Mehmed II, known as the Conqueror, faced the most formidable defensive structure in the world, the Theodosian Walls of Constantinople. These walls had stood for 1,000 years, rebuffing every siege and every army that dared to dream of taking the city. The Byzantines inside were comfortable. They relied on the work of their ancestors, believing their fortifications were an eternal constant in a changing world. But Mehmed was not interested in the status quo. He understood that history is not a slow, steady progression of incremental improvements. It is a series of violent, jagged jumps triggered by men who refuse to accept the limits of their time. He sought out the most advanced technical genius of his daymen, like the Hungarian iron founder Orban, and commissioned weapons that were previously thought to be impossible. The result was the Dardanelles gun, cast in 1464 by the master founder Munir Ali. This was a monster made of 18 tons of bronze. Because a single casting of that size was nearly impossible to transport across rugged terrain, Ali engineered it in two massive pieces that screwed together. This threading of bronze was a feat of precision engineering that predated the industrial lathe by centuries. It wasn't just a gun, it was a statement of intent. It was designed to fire stones so large they didn't just damage walls, they erased them. Today, the Great Bombards are finally silent. One of the last remaining examples, the Dardanelles gun, sits at Fort Nelson in the UK, a gift from Sultan Abdulaziz to Queen Victoria in 1866. When you stand next to it today, the first thing that hits you isn't its lethality, but its sheer scale. It doesn't look like a weapon in the traditional sense. It looks like a piece of heavy industrial infrastructure, a monolithic pipe designed to move the Earth itself. But then you look at the bore, you peer into that dark, wide throat, and you imagine a 1,500-pound granite sphere sitting inside it. You imagine the sheer volume of black powder required to move that mass. You imagine the roar that shook the foundations of the world when it fired. The gun was so powerful that the shockwave alone was said to have shattered windows for miles and caused miscarriages in nearby villages. It was a weapon of terror as much as a weapon of war. The 1807 incident at the Dardanelles serves as a final, ironic postscript to this story. It reminds us that true engineering excellence, what we call over-engineering, doesn't have an expiration date. While the British were focused on the rapid-fire capabilities and standardized bore sizes of their carronades, the Ottomans held on to the raw, crushing power of the past. The British were thinking about the efficient way to win a war. The Ottomans were using a weapon designed to end a civilization. The Great Bombard is proof that when technical genius is married to decisive leadership, no obstacle is permanent. The Byzantines fell because they were satisfied with what they had. They were the masters of yesterday. The Ottomans rose because they were obsessed with tomorrow. They saw a wall and didn't see a barrier. They saw a target that required a bigger idea. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the weapons and the men that changed the course of history, make sure you hit that subscribe button and join the ranks. We have many more stories of innovation and conquest to tell. Every weapon has a story, and every story changed the battlefield. If you enjoy uncovering the machines and inventions that shaped history, subscribe to the Ordnance Files, and join us next time when we'll open another file from the arsenal of history.